Prince William finds a struggling farmer sleeping in his tractor. What he does next is unbelievable. He didn't want a rescue. He just needed rest. The inside of the tractor cab was cold, stale, and still. Thomas Gale sat curled in the seat, like he'd grown roots there. His arms were wrapped around himself, his breath fogging up the cracked window. It had been 3 nights now. 3 full nights of sleeping inside this rusted shell on the edge of a field that had stopped feeding him months ago. He used to own this land. Walked it barefoot in the summers. Drove his wife across it in the early years, laughing, waving to neighbors as they passed. Back then, people waved back. Now they mostly pretended not to see him. Or maybe they genuinely didn't. 54. Not old enough to retire. Too tired to start over. His house had gone first, seized when the payments lapsed. Then the silo roof caved in. Then came the drought. After that, he stopped answering calls. He still had the tractor, though, and the edge of the field. That was all. Most nights, he lay still and listened to wind, to the creaking metal, to the ache in his chest that used to be grief, but now was just something duller. His hands, once tough and proud, now trembled slightly when he tried to light the tiny camping stove he kept under the seat. Even lighting a fire had become a task. He hadn't told anyone. Didn't want to explain. Didn't want to be pitied. He was the man who brought extra potatoes to the school lunch program. The one who fixed his neighbor's fence without being asked. How could he show his face now, living in the machine he once used to plow 10 acres by sunrise? He didn't know if he was asleep when it happened, or just in that strange space between sleep and shame. But then 2 soft taps. Tap, tap. He froze. It wasn't wind. Wasn't a bird. Someone was standing outside his window. Thomas blinked, wiped the fog with his sleeve, squinted into the light. A man stood there tall, well-built, dressed in a navy jacket and boots speckled with mud. No clipboard, no county badge, no camera. Thomas cracked the window open just an inch. "You all right in there?" the man asked, voice low, calm. T. Thomas stared at him, guarded. "I'm fine," he muttered. The man didn't leave, just nodded, slightly, hands in his pockets. "Doesn't look like fine. Looks like tired." Thomas didn't answer. A beat passed. "Name's William," the man said finally. "Mind if I sit for a bit?" Thomas looked at him hard. Something about the way he asked. No pity. Just presence. After a long moment, Thomas leaned back. "Suit yourself." He didn't know who the stranger really was, but that knock was about to change everything. The sun hadn't risen yet, not really. Just a dull haze over the frostbitten fields of East Anglia. The kind of morning where breath curls in the air, and even tractors seem reluctant to wake. But one sat running parked at the edge of a gravel path, engine low, headlights still on. Prince William stepped out of the unmarked vehicle behind it, dressed plainly. Blue jacket, brown boots, no entourage, no cameras. He was there for a sustainability. Visit quiet, respectful. But the tractor's position didn't look right. Crooked, almost hidden. He walked toward it slowly, boots crunching against gravel. That's when he saw the man, Thomas. Early 50s, maybe older in the eyes, sitting slumped in the cab, head down, one boot on the clutch, hands in his lap. William knocked once on the door frame. "Everything all right?" Thomas looked up, startled, blinked twice. "You from the council?" he asked. William shook, his head. "Just saw the tractor and wondered." Thomas sighed. "Broke down, again." Then after a pause, "Unless you've got a time machine or 10 grand, I'd say move along." There was no anger in the voice, just the exhaustion that comes after months of trying to hold something together with willpower and wire. William didn't flinch. "Not here to inspect," he said. "Just to ask." Thomas narrowed his eyes. "Ask what? Need a hand?" It was the way he said it level. No hint of superiority. No mention of titles. Just a man in boots, offering help. For a second, Thomas didn't know what to do with that. He leaned back, exhaling hard. "You're not from here." "No," W. William admitted. "But I've spent enough time on farms to know when someone looks like they've slept in their tractor." Thomas gave the ghost of a chuckle. "Didn't sleep. Just Didn't want to go home. Silence stretched between them, the kind that doesn't need to be filled. William walked around the front of the machine, placed a hand gently on the cold metal, then leaned against the wheel, looking out at the field. Thomas watched him, this stranger in a blue coat who hadn't walked away. "You ever lose a season?" he asked suddenly. William looked up. "I've lost people, never a harvest, but I know the weight." Thomas nodded. "Then maybe you do get it." Another moment passed. Then William said quietly, "Sometimes standing still is the bravest thing a man can do." The words hung in the cold air like breath. Thomas didn't speak, but he didn't look away either. And William didn't leave. He just stood there, beside him. Because not every rescue comes with a siren. Some arrive in boots and a blue jacket when you think no one's watching. Some people plant seeds in soil. Others plant them in people. The land was quiet, soaked in the warm breath of evening. William unscrewed the top of an old metal thermos and poured 2 cups of tea. No frills, no sugar. Just warmth shared between strangers. He handed one to Thomas, who accepted it with a small nod. They sat side by side on the tractor's edge, boots resting in the dry earth. The silence between them stretched wide, but not uncomfortable. Thomas was the first to speak. "It all hit at once," he said, staring ahead. "Rain stopped. Bills didn't." His voice was cracked around the edges, like a man who hadn't used it for more than necessity in months. His hands battered, sun-worn, steady, cradled the cup as if it was the only warmth he'd held in a while. "I thought we'd be okay," he continued. "But then the crops failed. Then the truck died. Then, my wife." He didn't say more, didn't have to. Just let it hang in the still air, like the dust that refused to settle. She was gone, in 2 days. Stroke. No warnings, just gone. His knuckles whitened around the rim of the cup. "We were married 37 years. She always said I worried too much. Guess she was right." William didn't speak. He just listened, his hands resting on his knees, body angled slightly toward Thomas, not intruding, just present. Thomas took a shaky breath and gave a hollow laugh. "Used to give away what we grew. Every harvest. Boxes of produce to the shelter down in Jasper. Canned goods to the church. Once, I bought 200 pounds of rice just to donate because I heard they were short." He shook his head. "I gave and gave. And now? Nobody remembers. Not even a phone call." His words didn't carry bitterness, just something quieter. A weariness that goes deeper than anger. "I keep wondering," he whispered. "Did I matter to anyone?" William looked at him then. Really looked. Not with pity. Not even with sympathy. But with the kind of recognition that only comes from having carried a similar ache. "Do you regret it?" he asked. Thomas took his time. He didn't answer with his mouth at first, but with the way he stared at the fields, the same soil he'd once trusted with his life. "No," he finally said. "I just hoped it would come back somehow. Not money. Just a knock on the door. A note. Something to say, 'We saw you.'" William's eyes stayed on him. Quiet. Steady. What Thomas didn't know was that this wasn't the first story William had heard like this. He didn't bring cameras. Just boots and a purpose. The ground was soft, soaked from the early rain, clinging to William's boots with every step. He didn't seem to mind. His coat was plain, his hands ungloved. Nothing about him screamed royalty except the quiet way people paused when he arrived. Thomas stood by the rusted tractor, one hand resting on the side like it was an old friend too tired to stand alone. He didn't smile, he didn't speak. But the way he nodded once, slowly, was enough to welcome him. William had been here before. Not this exact place, but this kind of place. Fields with more stories than seeds. Men who carried weights that didn't show up on scales. Years ago in a different village, a farmer told him, "It's not the frost that breaks you. It's when you realize you're the only one left trying." That sentence had stayed with him. He looked at the machine. "Batteries flat?" he asked. Thomas nodded. "Second time this week." William didn't hesitate. He reached for the cables in the truck without waiting to be asked. No instructions, no assistance. Just a quiet rhythm as he worked. "Try, now," he called. The engine coughed once, then again. Then it caught. The roar of life from that old machine cut through the morning fog. Thomas exhaled, barely smiling, but his eyes said more than a thank you ever could. William patted the hood like it was something sacred. "Still got fight in her," he said. He turned and looked out over the field. Rows half-tilled, patches of standing water. It wasn't much, but it was his, and William knew exactly what that meant. He thought of his mother in that moment, the way she used to say, "Find the quiet ones. They'll teach you the most." He saw that now. Thomas wasn't loud, but everything he did spoke. Getting up when it didn't make sense, fixing what no one else saw, hoping in silence. "You ever feel like walking away?" William asked. Thomas nodded. "Almost did last winter." "What stopped you?" "My son left his boots by the door. Figured I had to show him something was worth staying for." William didn't reply. He didn't need to. Before he turned to leave, he paused, looked Thomas in the eye. "I'll be back." Not for headlines, not for ceremony. Just because he meant it. And though no one else saw it, something deep began to shift in both of them. Most men don't keep promises to strangers. He wasn't most men. The letter arrived quietly. No signature required. No parade of black cars. Just an envelope, cream-colored and weighty, with a crest pressed into the top left corner. It slid through the mail slot of a temporary address Thomas didn't even want to claim. The return label said nothing flashy, just Kensington. He stared at it for a while, resting on the edge of the table, unopened. He wasn't sure if he wanted to know what was inside. Part of him feared it was a formality. A polite thank you. Maybe even an apology for the visit. Some distant PR team cleaning up the tracks. But he opened it anyway. The handwriting was tidy. Not printed, not typed. Actual ink. Actual care. "Dear Mr. Gale," it began. "Thank you for taking the time to share your story with me last week. It was not forgotten. In fact, I've thought of it often." Enclosed beneath the note was a folded document government header, highlighter marks, a list of numbers and names. A direct line to a rural sustainability grant. Another card listed contacts from a regional food relief network, one that William had mentioned but hadn't promised. And yet here it was. Thomas reread the letter twice, then sat back slowly. His hand rested on the table, fingers tracing the edge of the envelope. He remembered, he whispered. The words sounded unfamiliar in his mouth, like something that belonged to someone else. He didn't rush to pick up the phone. He didn't even know what to say. There was a part of him still suspicious. Still worn down from all the doors that hadn't opened, and the ones that slammed, shut right after. He'd gotten mail like this before, mass-printed, sent by interns, full of hollow offers. But this felt different. "So?" he called. And when the voice answered, it wasn't a machine. It was a woman, warm, clear, already expecting him. "Mr. Gale?" she said. "We've been waiting for you." He didn't know what to say to that. Not at first. He just swallowed, gripped the edge of the table a little tighter. I wasn't sure anyone would follow up," he finally said. "We're glad you did," she replied gently. "We've already reviewed your land files, and we believe there's real potential here." A pause. "And I was told to tell you His Royal Highness personally requested we make this a priority." Thomas didn't speak. He couldn't. Not yet. But inside, something long frozen began to thaw. Not fully. Not loud. Just enough to feel like maybe he hadn't been left behind. And when he hung up the phone, the silence that followed didn't feel empty. It felt like the start of something waiting to grow. 3 days later, the gravel road leading to Thomas's farm bore tire tracks he didn't recognize. A white van, pulled up with a quiet hum. The logo on the side sun-faded but still legible. Rural Recovery Initiative, Soil to Soul. Thomas stepped out from the barn, wiping grease from his hands, not expecting much. Maybe another form to fill, another lecture from someone who'd never touched a cow or harvested in frost. But what stepped out were 2 people in work boots and winter coats, clipboards in hand, not judgment in their eyes. "We're just here to look," one said gently. "See what's left. See what can be done." They didn't start with questions. They started with walking. They walked the broken fence line, ran gloved hands through frost-hardened soil. They looked inside the barn with its sagging beams, peered into the old irrigation system that hadn't worked since Thomas's father fell ill. And all the while, they listened. Thomas tried to keep his voice steady. He talked about the yield drops, the failed grant applications, the market swings. But when they reached the old tractor behind the barn, the one his daughter used to ride in when she was small, his voice cracked. "I didn't think anyone would care," he said. The younger man looked at him and replied quietly, "Most people don't, but we do." That's when Thomas noticed something different about them. They weren't checking boxes. They were checking heartbeat of the land, of the man standing on it. By the time they sat down for tea in the cold kitchen, Thomas had stopped bracing for bad news. Instead, he found himself leaning in. "We're not here to hand out bandages," the woman said plainly. "We're here to invest. This farm, it matters." He blinked. "You mean, like, money?" She nodded. "Money, mentorship, machines if you need them, but mostly, belief. You've been on the edge alone long enough." He stared down at the cup in his hands. It was shaking. Slightly. "I thought it was over," he whispered. "It's not," she said. "It's turning." They left just before sunset, promising to return with a plan. Thomas stood at the edge of his porch, wind brushing his coat, watching the van disappear down the lane. He didn't say a word. He just stood there. And that night, for the first time in a long time, he fell asleep before midnight. The call came, the next morning. Not from a foundation, not from an agency, from the royal household. No scripted lines, no handlers. Just a voice saying, "The Duke would like to visit again, this time not just to listen, but to build something with you." Thomas didn't know what to say, so he just said yes. Princes don't usually come back, but this one did. There were no guards this time. No entourage, no cameras trailing behind. Just William, plain blue shirt, worn boots, hands tucked in his pockets, walking back up that dusty path toward the field where a man had once poured his heart into the soil. Thomas saw him coming from the barn. He blinked twice, unsure if the heat was playing tricks, but the figure didn't vanish. He got closer. Real. William offered a small wave. Nothing grand, just human. They stood in the field for a minute before anyone spoke. The land was quiet, but not empty. It held stories now. Shared ones. "I didn't think you'd come back," Thomas said, eyes squinting in the sun. William gave a soft laugh. "Most people don't." They walked slowly through the rows, what was left of them. Some dry stalks still stood like tired sentinels. Others had withered into the earth. William bent down, picked up a handful of soil, let it slip through his fingers. "Still good underneath," he said. "Just needs time. And care." Thomas nodded, but his silence felt like hesitation. "You don't have to rebuild this alone," William said. "I've been alone a long time." "I know," William replied gently. "But maybe that's what needs to change first." They reached the edge of the property where a small patch of green still clung to life, a sign of something possible. "I can't fix everything," William said, turning to face him. "But we can plant something new." He pulled a folded piece of paper from his back pocket. "There's a program I've helped fund, sustainable farming. No interest loans, local partnerships. You wouldn't have to change who you are. Just the support around you." Thomas took the paper but didn't open it right away. He looked at William, not at the name, not at the title, but at the man. "You're serious?" "I am." There was a long pause. Not awkward, just full. Thomas extended his hand, and William shook it. It wasn't just a handshake. It was something older, something that felt like trust. "I don't know what this will become," Thomas said. "That's the thing about planting," William answered. "You never really do." And with one quiet handshake, they became more than strangers. They didn't talk about fixing the past. They talked about growing the future. It started around a kitchen table with chipped mugs and scratch paper. No microphones, no big slogans, just a few voices that mattered: William, Thomas, and 3 local growers who had seen too many neighbors sell everything and leave. "This land's tired," one of them said. "But not dead." They nodded. That was enough to start with. William didn't come to hand out promises. He came to listen. And what he heard was possibility tucked between frustration and faith. They didn't need rescue. They needed someone to believe the future was still worth building. So they built. A plan came together. Trial a new hybrid seed on the eastern. Plot one that could handle erratic rain and stubborn soil. Pair it with low-cost irrigation tech, subsidized by a community fund. Partner with a research lab for soil analysis and yield data. Thomas didn't say much that day, but when they asked who would lead the first pilot, he just looked out the window and said, "I already broke the field in spring. Might as well finish what I started." 2 weeks later, William came back, same plain coat, same worn boots, to see rows of early seedlings pushing through. Thomas walked with him down the edge of the patch. "We call it Tom's patch now," one of the teens joked nearby. "Even the birds know not to land here unless they've got ideas." What started as a test turned into something bigger. Local students began showing up on weekends, biology majors, ag tech apprentices, even a retired school teacher who hadn't held a shovel in years. They dug, planted, measured, and shared notes. No one told them to. They just wanted in. There was something about it, this piece of land that had almost been abandoned now becoming the heart of a new idea. One that didn't erase the past but refused to stay stuck in it. And then William did something that surprised even Thomas. He handed him a folder. Inside, a formal agreement giving Thomas co-ownership in the community partnership. A share, not a donation, not a title for show. A stake. Thomas looked down at the paper, then up at William. "You didn't have to do this," he said. "I know," William replied. "But sometimes people need proof that the work they've done matters." Thomas didn't speak for a long time, just folded the paper, tucked it into his coat, and stared out at the plot like he was seeing it for the first time. But William still had one more surprise in store. It wasn't a press event. It was a thank you. The sun came early that morning, brighter, warmer, as if even the weather had heard what the day was meant for. Thomas stood at the edge of his field, staring out across rows that once looked like failure. Today, they looked like a beginning. There were no velvet ropes, no suits, just laughter. Buses from the village school had arrived not long after sunrise. Children ran into the field in rubber boots and mismatched gloves, their teachers trailing behind with clipboards and wide smiles. A few parents came too, mothers with baskets, fathers with folding chairs, grandparents with quiet pride. And then came William, not in a motorcade, not under a banner. He walked up the path with a rolled-up shirt sleeve, greeting volunteers by name as if he'd known them for years. No one was holding a camera. That was the rule. This wasn't for headlines. This was for the soil. Thomas watched as William knelt beside a boy and handed him a small red seed potato. The boy's eyes lit up. "You plant it with care," William said softly, "and let the ground do the rest." There were stations set up across the field, one for planting, one for composting, another for learning how worms help roots breathe. It wasn't flashy, but it was magic in motion. Thomas didn't speak much. He just watched, took it all in. His land, which had once sat silent and starved, was alive again. The sound of children laughing filled the space that used to echo only with wind. He looked down at his hands, dirty, worn, and for the first time in a long while they felt useful again. Near midday, William stood on a small hay bale and raised his hand gently. The kids settled into the grass. Teachers hushed. All eyes turned. "I came here once," he began, "when this field was quiet. I met a man who had given everything to feed others and asked for nothing in return. Today, we don't just honor that man, we follow his lead." He looked over at Thomas. "This land once gave to many," William said. "Now we give back." Applause rose, not wild, not staged, just honest. A sound full of hearts opening. Thomas's nodded, blinking hard. He tried to speak, but no words came. A little girl ran up and handed him a sunflower she'd picked from the edge of the garden bed. He took it in both hands, like it might break if he didn't. People clapped, but no one asked for speeches. They just let the moment breathe. And just when he thought it couldn't get any more surreal, William reached into a small satchel and pulled out something from the palace. meant only for him. The morning mist still hung low when the car arrived. No fanfare. No press vans. Just one black vehicle humming gently to a stop near the front gate of Thomas's land. Out stepped the same man in the navy coat, only this time. He wasn't here to listen. He was here to honor. Prince William shook Thomas's hand without words. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was full, weighted with understanding. In his other hand, William held a rectangular box, wrapped in simple brown paper, no ribbons, just a note tied to the string. "Thank you for holding on." Inside, nestled in soft linen, was a framed photograph. At first glance, Thomas almost didn't recognize it. The colors were richer, the creases gone. But the memory was instant. It was him and Sarah, his late wife, standing shoulder to shoulder in front of the old barn. Her arm looped through his, a few cows in the background, and the angle just right to catch the gold light of a summer morning. It had been taken by a local reporter who'd passed through for a community piece, and Thomas had lost the original in a storm years ago. Now it was back, restored, preserved. Below the photo, a brass plaque gleamed softly in the morning light. Etched into it were just 4 words: "Steward of the soil." Thomas's fingers grazed the corner of the frame, then stilled. His voice was nearly a whisper. "That was our last photo together." William looked at him, no formality, no distance, just presence. "Then maybe," he said gently, "it's time for your first of many more." Thomas blinked. The tears didn't fall. But they welled with permission. The kind of permission most men don't get until it's too late to grieve out loud, to feel seen. For a long moment they stood there, not as farmer and royal. Just 2 men, both carrying memory like a weight and a gift. The visit didn't last long. William didn't stay for tea. He didn't pose for photos. He just nodded once, said, "You matter," and turned back toward the car. But the space he left behind didn't feel empty. It felt sacred. Later that evening, Thomas sat at his kitchen table with the frame before him. He'd placed it beside Sarah's recipe book, still stained with her handwriting and butter marks. And then, for the first time in years, he picked up a pen not to sign a check or fill out paperwork, but to write something real. Not a letter to the palace. A letter from him. Not asking for anything. Just offering something that hadn't been asked for in return. A story. His. Because sometimes, when someone gives you your memory back, the only way to thank them is to share what's left of your heart. The words weren't grand, but they rooted deep. It was a quiet Sunday morning when the letter appeared in the local paper. Page 7, just under the church announcements and above the weather. No headlines screaming for attention. Just a simple title. To the ones who stayed. It was signed by Thomas. No one expected it. Not from him. Not after the years he'd gone silent, tucked behind the fences of a struggling farm and a life that had folded in on itself. But there it was, his voice, steady on the page, reaching further than his tractor ever had. He didn't talk about numbers. Not once. No debt tallies, no yield projections. Instead he spoke of hands those who helped without needing thanks. Of eyes those who didn't turn away when the land stopped blooming. "I thought I had to go it alone," the letter read, but I was wrong. What I needed wasn't more rain or more luck. It was people. People who saw past the weeds. People who didn't flinch when I didn't have answers. He thanked the man who still waved from across the road every morning. The woman who left a box of canned peaches at his gate without a note. The teenager who once helped fix his fence and didn't ask for pay. And then, in one short line near the bottom, he said the thing no one expected. Sometimes the hardest thing is asking for help, but the bravest thing is showing up when it's offered. The letter ended without flourish. Just his name, and the word "thank you." Within days, someone at the community center framed a copy and hung it in the hallway. Not because it was famous, but because it was true. You could see folks stop in front of it, reading slowly, quietly. Some left with misty eyes, others with a little more stillness in their steps. It wasn't just about farming anymore. It was about something deeper. About being seen when you think you've disappeared. About the quiet courage it takes to open your door when someone finally knocks. Thomas didn't speak about the letter after it was printed. He didn't need to. It had already done what it was meant to do. But one final invitation would prove just how far his story had traveled. In a glass house full of green, one farmer stood tall. Thomas had never left the country before. He hadn't even left his county in a decade. But now, here he was, suit-pressed, boots shined, but still his own, walking through Windsor Gardens with soil still in his fingernails. The greenhouse was warm, filled with hanging vines and soft sunlight that glinted through glass like it had waited all morning just to shine on this moment. There were dignitaries, scientists, students with notepads and eyes wide with wonder. But all of them turned as William entered, and behind him, Thomas. No one clapped. Not yet. They just watched. William stepped forward, not to command the room, but to give it away. "We talk often about innovation," he said. "About change, growth, vision. But sometimes vision doesn't come from lecture halls. Sometimes it comes from fields with broken tractors and hands that never stopped working." The silence settled like something sacred. "I met Thomas during a visit that wasn't planned to go anywhere," William continued. "But that's how most of life works. The moments that change us don't ask for permission. They just show up." He turned toward Thomas. "He reminded me that service isn't just in titles. It's in soil." A few people wiped their eyes. Others just nodded. Thomas stepped forward, then not with a speech, but with presence. He held no notes. Only two small bags in his hands. Seeds. One from the trial plot back home. The other, wildflower mix from a local shop near the farm. He held them up. "One's food," he said, voice steady. "The other's beauty. You need both." The audience was still, the way you get when something simple becomes holy. Around him the greenhouse buzzed softly, vines curling up beams, herbs pushing through beds, new farmers leaning in to see what this man who wore humility like armor might do next. He placed the seeds on the table between them. "Whatever this becomes," he said, "just let it feed someone." There was no thunderous applause. Just something better. A quiet rising of people standing one by one without a word. Not because they were told to, but because something in them did. Later in the photos, Thomas wasn't posing. He was just standing there, sleeves rolled, hands at ease, as if he belonged there all along. And maybe he had, because sometimes the richest land grows beneath the feet of those no one was watching.